And hello, and welcome back to all of our viewers out there. Apologies from us, we had a little technical issue. It doesn't happen that often, but very sadly, as we all realize, when we're depending on the virtual world out there, occasionally it can have a few little glitches. But you're all very, very welcome back. So thank you again for joining us. Our next guest is a career diplomat of more than 3 decades. He has served in missions in Moscow, Kiev, in London, in Geneva, as well as working as an international civil servant with the Commonwealth Secretariat in London. I want to welcome the Ambassador of India to the United Arab Emirates, His Excellency Ambassador Pavan Kapoor joins us now. So I'm delighted that he's with us. Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Etna. Very pleased to be here.
Now, of course, your focus and your responsibility here in the UAE is to look after the Indian population here. A huge, very vibrant Indian population here. Talk to me in terms of how you all together, how you managed the pandemic here over the last year.
Well, thanks, Etna. It has been literally just over a year since the pandemic started, and to be honest, I myself been here just over 3 months, 3 to 4 months, and we were completely taken aback by the suddenness of it all. Yes, there were reports coming in, but when we decided to close our airspace in India, and then our community here, which is a huge one at about 3.4 million, started having lots of issues. In the initial stages, they had problems with access to medical facilities. Some of them, we have 65% of our population are blue-collar workers. They had issues about needing to get into isolation facilities because they felt that one of them got infected, the others, were in danger of also getting infected. So there were a whole series of issues that we needed to deal with, as I said, ranging from the medical to the to dealing with food, because once they were in quarantine, then they needed either to get food rations if they were families, or if they were in bachelor accommodation, as it's called here, then they needed actual cooked food. And this included through the times of Ramadan last year. You can imagine, we had to change our functioning of the embassy entirely. We became, as I said, more and more focusing just on their welfare. Bilateral, functioning reduced to a minimum. Of course, we worked very closely with the UAE authorities. And then, of course, when the whole repatriation started, when we opened up our airspace, then it was again a massive, massive challenge trying to get people back, because there were hundreds of thousands of people wanting to go back, and very, very limited space with all sorts of other constraints and considerations that had to be put in place. But anyway, I'm glad that we could see through a lot of that. It was a really very difficult period, but I have to say that, one, we had the complete backing of the government of India to take decisions as we felt fit, but also we worked very closely with the UAE authorities who supported us all the way through. And ultimately, it's credit to both sides to come together and collaborate that we were able to manage this, I think, somewhat successfully.
Talk to me a little bit about that repatriation exercise, because this was probably the biggest, and certainly under your watch, and hopefully it will not have to happen again. But that must have presented a lot of challenges for all of your people.
Indeed, it did. In fact, Etna, as I said, initially itself, when we set up a registration website, when we got the go-ahead from New Delhi to say, okay, we can start with some flights, we had within the first 3 days, I think we had over 250,000 people registering on the website. It was completely mind-boggling. It was very daunting. And then we had to sort of literally, try and analyze the data. We decided early upon that we're going to take everybody at face value in terms of their reason for travel. We put them, had given them categories, and they put down the reasons. We had to then decide which of them needs to get priority to travel. Now, we had a broad understanding that obviously if people have had an incident in the family, a death in the family, or there are pregnant women or ladies or others who need to travel for medical purposes, we would obviously give them priority. But, even the numbers within that were exceptionally high. So I had to sort of literally tell my team, okay, you just work on this objectively, because since, as I said, we had suspended our air services agreement, we were going to run all special flights individually. So we had to not just work out the manifest for each flight, we had to actually get approvals for each flight because there was no normal approval processes. We had to process everything to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and to the General Civil Aviation Authority here. And then we had to, after we had called up people and ensured that, okay, are you willing to fly on so-and-so date? You've been shortlisted based on these objective criteria. We would then give these manifests to Air India and, say, okay, now issue them tickets. And then we would try and ensure that, how do we make sure that they travel safe? So we work closely with UAE health authorities to have some rapid tests at the airport for everyone who traveled from UAE. And this was unprecedented. And I must say, great credit to this country who, the authorities who came forward to say, we will try and give you as much confidence as we can. So we had these rapid IgG, IgM tests for everyone who was boarding. And by the time they would do these tests and they would come with their results, then they could be told, are you fit to travel or not? And then we wanted to make sure that even flights were not going, empty at that stage. So we were having to cater to calling a few extra people at the airport who were cleared and said, okay, we'll see in case there's space, then we'll try and send you, because we didn't want, when we know space was such at a premium, we wanted to make sure that anybody who really needed to could travel to these destinations. So it was quite an exercise. And again, like I said, to give you an example of the scale of it, in 3 months, less than 3 months, we had more than 300,000 Indian nationals who traveled from the UAE to India.
That's a lot of people and a lot of logistics to actually handle to make sure that you can actually execute this smoothly. Now, sadly, in many areas, the pandemic, and I think the response to it, has polarized some countries, some organizations. I think certainly we've seen some great cooperation going on as well. What would you say in terms of, effective leadership, I suppose? What's needed to make sure that we have some, coordination, some cohesion to create a roadmap for recovery?
Well, as you said, I think you need these days with the kind of developments that have happened, I think if lessons are to be learned, I think certainly leaders need to be much more agile. They need to be flexible. They need to adapt to situations which they may have foreseen or not foreseen. And I think more importantly, they also need to be willingness to engage with others. Because I think one clear, indicator from these developments, and of course, pandemic is not unique in that sense. There are other indivisible challenges like climate change. But the fact is that it all calls for greater global coordination, and therefore leaders must be willing to engage with other leaders, willing to collaborate, learn from others. And I guess also be willing to accept if mistakes are made. Of course, for this, I think that they need to have develop a trust with citizens, with their people, because often the solutions for these kind of situations are to be sustainable would require large populations to follow instructions, and that would only come if leaders have trust and credibility. So I think some degree of citizen empowerment would also feature as, I would say, as part of an element of effective leadership in these circumstances.
If there are lessons, I suppose, to be learned for leaders as a result of this pandemic, what do you think would be the key lessons that we really should be keeping uppermost in mind?
I think one of the things would be the fact of the interconnectedness and interdependence that exists in the world. It's something that needs reiteration, although I think it is very obvious. It's still, I think it needs reiteration because, as I said, this is the pandemic is an example of no one is safe till everyone is safe, and I think this really needs to be reinforced. Leaders have to understand that you don't have to look at national interest through a narrow lens. You have to also understand that global cooperation is not altruism. You are helping when you're working with others. You're helping yourself. This has been sort of seen through this pandemic. So some of these factors really need to come in. I think we've seen this in the case of both India and UAE. That while we've tried to work on helping our own citizens, we've also reached out to other populations overseas, particularly the more vulnerable countries, the countries less endowed with resources, because these are circumstances where it really calls on leaders to reach out to the others. As I said, not just to try and show your great-mindedness, but even for your own self-interest, because ultimately, given the openness of economies, given the interconnected nature of trade, what goes out will come back. And let's face it, that even the fact that the spread of the pandemic, its widespreadness that happened, was also because of this whole interconnectedness. So I think, might be a bit of a cliche, but ultimately, a global problem needs a global solution.
Indeed, it does, and I think this is what we're hearing from everybody, and I think there is definitely a willingness to move in this direction. But at the same time, in many countries, and we can just see it in terms of, travel right now, and there's a safety reason here whereby borders are closed and we can't travel. That's just on perhaps a personal and business level, but on a wider scale. There was a time when we embraced globalization. Do you think we will get back there again? And how important do you see the concept of embracing globalization?
Well, I think certainly I do think that it is important. It's a fact, as I said, but these are cycles that the world economy goes through. In fact, it's worth pointing out that in a way we were more open and more globalized in the early 1900s than we were in the early 2000s. So in terms of, if you look at free movement of people, of goods and services, things were easier out there. But we go through these cycles, and I think that it's possible that in the wake of these developments, there will be some initial tendencies in the short term to, put up barriers and, close borders, because everyone is more concerned about what happens to their own people. But I think there are certain underlying factors which will lead, countries to return to the idea of greater interconnectedness, greater trade, because those fundamentals have not changed. The fact is that international trade is the fundamental basis is the theory of competitive advantage. And that still remains valid. So everybody's not going to be producing for themselves. It doesn't make sense. So that will continue. The fact that, you will, that you need each other's help to resolve issues will continue. So I think over time, in the medium to long term, there will still be globalization. There will be greater interconnectedness and movement, even if there is a bit of some barriers coming up in the short term.
Now, talk to me about the relationship between the United Arab Emirates and India. And again, this goes back a long, long time. It's very, very important. It's very strong. It's been a cooperative one. But perhaps, in looking at areas of cooperation and stronger cooperation in terms of health, in terms of technology, food security, and particularly during the pandemic. Give us a bit more detail on that.
Yeah, so Etna, what was interesting was that right since the start of the pandemic, we continued having, we had fairly early on a good conversation between the leaders, between, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, and we had and Prime Minister Narendra Modi on the Indian side. And they, exchanged views and said, okay, let's see what we can do together to help our people. And I think certainly, as you said, on the healthcare front, we were pleased to, help UAE with some amount of these pharmaceuticals with, hydroxychloroquine tablets when required. We also were happy that we were able to send some healthcare workers to beef up the system here. But we were also happy to receive help in the initial stages from the UAE in terms of, PPE masks and other things that, we were all in short supply till we geared up ourselves. And we have kept this cooperation going. We now have been talking with each other on vaccines. We were able to send about 200,000 doses of the made in India, AstraZeneca Covishield vaccine in early February, which was here. We're still looking at how else we can collaborate on that front. But again, as you said, food security was another area where we felt was very important. And I think, we ensured that even when there was a lockdown in India and everything was shut down, we ensured that food supplies, fruit, vegetable, kept coming from India to the UAE. Special flights clearances were given so that there was no, shortages here. We contributed to that. And I think as a natural follow-up, we're also into discussions with UAE to develop a food corridor, as to how we can have UAE investments in the food sector in India and look at what kind of supply chains we can have to ensure availability of food for them, even as they try and beef up their own production of food as part of the lessons from the pandemic.
Yes, indeed, and I think that will be two-way trade there in the longer term as well, in terms of food security for both countries. But talk to me a little bit in general too about investment opportunities between the UAE and India, because we have some key Indian players here, but there's investment opportunities on both sides.
Certainly, you've seen the key Indian players who have invested in very big way here, whether it's in the retail sector, some in the construction sector. But others are putting in a lot of money where their mouth is. And I think we are certainly looking for considerable investments from UAE to India, primarily in the infrastructure sector, whether it's roads, ports, all sorts of logistics. We are also, encouraging them to look, as I said, in the food sector now, even healthcare, if they feel that there is interest in that front. So we have tried to go and make a lot of changes to ease things, particularly for the UAE. I should mention here that the government of India has gone out of its way to ensure that there are special facilitation for UAE investors, given our very close, comprehensive strategic partnership. So ADIA, for example, has got certain benefits, on par with the best that we offer, so that they are treated preferentially. But that extends to other investors, particularly sovereign wealth funds from the UAE. And we're also looking at seeing what else we can do. We have a constant dialogue. We have a high-level task force at the Minister of Trade level in India, and with His Highness Sheikh Hamid here with ADIA. And we discuss what issues they are facing them or concerning them, which is slowing things down, and we try and keep resolving those issues. So it's a constant dialogue, but I think it's an area where both countries are determined to take the relationship much deeper and stronger.
Indeed, I think, and again, I think we're all very aware of that strong relationship that exists here, and without a doubt, as you say, it will get stronger as the years go, without a doubt. Talk to me just as we close here in terms of, what's next, what has to be done, what do you feel is urgent here to get things back on track and making sure that the Indian population, that everything is good, it's in place, it's safe and sound, and hopefully we'll get to that point where we will get the opportunity to build back better soon.
Well, as I said, we are talking with our UAE colleagues on a range of issues. We are keeping the momentum up. We were very pleased that we had several delegations here, a couple of them in person, also in the last few months, particularly for the IDEX, NAVDEX here in Abu Dhabi. We had our Army Chief visit in December. We had our Foreign Minister who came by in November. Our Junior Minister for Foreign Affairs came by in January. We were pleased to have Sheikh Abdullah visit in late February. So the bilateral agenda is continuing. But I think what we are also trying to see is how can we facilitate greater travel with safety, and we have to try and collaborate to ensure that we open our economies wisely and safely. Now, this is a bilateral engagement as well as a multilateral engagement, because at the end of the day, it's not just restricted to two of us. So we are engaging in discussion to see what we can do to make each other, more comfortable. I think the UAE authorities have done a great job with the rollout of the vaccine, and they have sort of been able to control the number of cases here. Although there was a bit of a spike in January, February, but things have again leveled out. Back in India, things have got better, but now again there's a bit of a spike, and we are sort of taking strong measures to ensure that this doesn't go out of control. Of course, the good thing is that, if you can put it this way, is that it's more in contained areas. So we're not having to go for any big lockdowns because that impacts the economy in a very big way. But we are now trying to contain that, do a lot of tracing and testing again. And I think trying to just reinforce the message from our leadership to the people that, it's not over. You've got to continue with all the COVID appropriate behavior, follow all the protocols. But at the same time, we've also rolled out our vaccination program in a big way. In fact, from April 1, it's also opened out to all 45-year-olds and above. So we're hoping that by the end of summer, we will be considerably advanced in that, which would give the confidence for people to travel along with, of course, arrangements that we can agree upon between both sides.
Yes, indeed. It's been a challenging time for everybody in the world. And I think when we look at a population as big as India, it presents, even tougher challenges too. But again, good to hear that everybody is working towards solutions, and, it's all about keeping everybody safe. And as you say too, keeping our eye on what we need in the future. And everybody wants to get back to work. We want to get the economy back on track. And more importantly, we want to make sure that we have healthy populations. We have to leave it there. Ambassador Kapoor, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your insights, and thank you for your cautious optimism out there and all your great work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, my pleasure.
And that was the Indian ambassador here in the United Arab Emirates, His Excellency Pavan Kapoor. Thank you all so much. Stay with ABLF. We will be back shortly.